There's talk of a war between Bitcoin Core and Bitcoin Knots, two different node clients that enforce the same rules in very different ways. But here's the truth, no matter which software wins, the real power isn't in the developers, it's in you. If you run your own Bitcoin node, you decide what rules to follow, you validate your own transactions, and you secure your financial sovereignty. That's how Bitcoin stays unbreakable. This is the actual article that I've come across, which is rather interesting and gives a really simple explanation as to what are the two different types of Bitcoin client software that are actually used and deployed on those Bitcoin nodes that form part of the Bitcoin network, and how between them the node wars could actually influence Bitcoin price. So let's go through it and explain it under the covers. Just to start off, Bitcoin's decentralization has never been just about how many nodes exists. It's always been about what those nodes are running and who actually decides how they ought to behave. So for over a decade, it goes on to say that Bitcoin Core has always been that predominant supreme node software. Nearly every full node on the network, which is in the hundreds and thousands that are actually dispersed across the world on the network today, runs some version of it. But in 2025, that monopoly is now being challenged in a big way by Bitcoin Knots, which is a long-running but often overlooked implementation that is suddenly gaining serious traction. Now, Bitcoin Knots is the second alternative Bitcoin client software that is actually run on the node. So let's discuss what is Bitcoin Knots and why now. Bitcoin Knots is a full node implementation maintained by Luke Dasher since 2011. It started as a slightly modified version of Core with additional features, but over time has become something more of a refuge for node operators who want more configurability and less reliance on decisions made by a small group of core maintainers. Now, it goes on to say that while Knots remain compatible with Bitcoin's consensus rules, as with Core, it enables deeper control at the policy level. Node runners can now filter on spam, tweak how their node accepts and relays transactions, and generally take back sovereignty over how their node behaves. One of its most popular features, it goes on to say, is that ability to filter out parasitic transactions or spam transactions, as we're most hearing about, low value junk that clogs the mempool and drives up fees unnecessarily. So mempool policing spam, this is actually the battleground. I'll go and explain what is mempool. One of the biggest pain points, it says, in Bitcoin today is spam. In fact, it's the biggest issue, not just with Bitcoin and blockchains, but across the internet. In particular, transaction spam that exploits the mempool, flooding the network with high fee, low utility data to crowd out legitimate economic activity. Now, mempool is none other than an area of memory on the Bitcoin node client that actually hosts any new transactions that are getting pulled and slotted, if you like, into a block. Remember, every 10 minutes, a brand new block of transactions actually gets committed and mined, and that's how the Bitcoin miners that are mining new Bitcoins get rewarded for their efforts for solving highly complex mathematical problems. That's really how the whole Bitcoin value proposition, its network, works, and how it is important for Bitcoin nodes to actually validate those transactions that are being created and mined by these Bitcoin miners. So you can see the dichotomy between the miners and the nodes. So let's go on and explain a little bit more. It says that the Bitcoin's core philosophy has been that nodes should avoid applying economic filters, fearing that allowing such behavior could lead to fragmentation or censorship. So the result, every node must accept and propagate this junk, whether the operator wants to or not. Knots disagrees. With flags like reject parasites equals 1, Knots lets operators filter out spam and preserve block space for meaningful use. So in effect, this allows the Bitcoin Knots node clients to actually empower them to pose their own policy and configurability on what sort of transactions gets included or slotted into their localized mempools, those localized ledgers, if you like, for adding new blocks on the Bitcoin network every 10 minutes. So this is an important way to filter out, as it says here, those unwanted or junk-like transactions that would just simply clog up the actual network itself, which is really against the actual fundamental value proposition of Bitcoin as being that global monetary network. We already have the internet that hosts a lot of awful junk out there and spam. We don't need another internet. We've got the actual internet for that. What we want in the Bitcoin is just to reserve Bitcoin as that supreme collateral global monetary network. And for that, we need to insist on having the sovereignty and control on the Bitcoin nodes operators to enable them to filter out the junk and just retain the original economic transactional activity on the Bitcoin network. So we're going to be seeing, as I'm getting an impression here, that the Bitcoin nodes is going to become more prevalent, and we're going to see the Bitcoin core node operators decline. So there's at the moment this kind of battle that's happening between the two sets of Bitcoin node operators based on the version of the Bitcoin client software that they use. Bitcoin Core, which is the origin, and Bitcoin nodes, which is an alternative version of Bitcoin Core. It adds additional configurability means in order to filter out, as it says here, unwanted transactions that would just simply clog up the network unnecessarily, and it goes against what Bitcoin actually stands for, nothing more than that. I'm just going to go on and just complete this picture. And it goes on to say why this could lead to a fall. I don't think this will lead to a fall because past experience have shown that we've had several instances of fork attempts in its history. We had Bitcoin Cash, which is still operating as a side chain, so as an alternative fork on the original Bitcoin network. That is slowly dwindling to zero. No one is using it as a store of value, which is Bitcoin fundamentally. And there's been many other versions and past attempts of failures. So I don't think, it says here it's unlikely for now, I don't think it will ever be at all the case where we're going to see a fall. We're going to be seeing, as I explained before, an increased momentum and rise of people migrating themselves, I'm talking about the Bitcoin node operators, from Bitcoin core client software to Bitcoin nodes for the reasons I just mentioned, right? So I see this as a natural transition, regardless of which version, and this is actually very important, regardless of which version of the Bitcoin node client software that it uses, this will not change the fundamental aspect of consensus mechanism. What do I mean by that? Another important attribute is, in order to mitigate this battle between, in this case, between two versions of the Bitcoin node client software, and even to mitigate the potential concentration risk amongst the Bitcoin developers to only a few, every new proposal, and I mean every single new proposal of a brand new code change into the Bitcoin network, it needs to be raised under a separate proposal, the denominated Bitcoin Implementation Proposal, BIP for short. And in addition to that, it needs to be agreed amongst the majority, if not all, of the Bitcoin node validators, whether it's NOTs or core alike. So given the increasing amounts of people becoming Bitcoin node operators themselves, regardless of which of the two versions that they use, every new proposal of a code change on the Bitcoin network needs to be agreed upon by the majority of the Bitcoin node community, which is into the hundreds and thousands. And potentially we can easily see this happening amongst the millions out there across the world. So it's going to become even more difficult and more of a challenge to get any brand new code features proposed and agreed and then implemented in a timely fashion. So it's really, this debate between which version of the Bitcoin node client software they use, core versus not, is besides the point. That is not going to influence or change at all the consensus mechanism, because it's the same consensus mechanism that is built within each of these two versions, not and core. So that's the point. So I wouldn't worry too much. So the lesson learned for me here is I would encourage Bitcoin holders and Bitcoin newbie investors to run their own node. Have a go. I mean, I can show you there is another way to do it. And for those that may not be techies and don't know how to do it, this shouldn't dissuade you the slightest. You can easily purchase, as it says here, mynodebtc.com, a Bitcoin node, download the client and implement it yourself locally. So what I'm trying to say here is there's plenty of ways to download and install and run your own Bitcoin node. And what would that mean in practice? It means that every time you want to conduct new transactional activity under your Bitcoin wallet address, you can actually link it to the node that you have and verify it yourself rather than delegating it to a suite of other node operators out there in the world to do that transaction verifiability and transaction inspection to make sure it's legitimate, those new transactions on the network itself. So it's such an important feature and is highly recommended for investors to actually have a go and install their own Bitcoin node, because the more Bitcoin node operators that we have out there in the world, as I explained just a moment ago, given the consensus mechanism that is already in place, regardless of the Bitcoin node version that you use, core or not, it will make it even more difficult to propose and implement and agree on a Bitcoin code feature change. So the more people roll up their sleeves and get their hands dirty and have a go, or you can just simply order one and have it easily stored on your laptop or in your home computer in the office where you live and have a go and run your own node that way. And that empowers us to have full sovereignty rights, full sovereignty control over the transactions we make over the Bitcoin network. And that is the beauty and elegance in design of the Bitcoin network. It's not left to a limited set of node validators, no matter how dispersed they may be across the world. It would give us the option as additional participants to join in the network community as Bitcoin node operators and start validating those transactions ourselves, which is highly recommended. It's not just me saying it, in fact, it's what other Bitcoin experts and investors are already doing at the moment. Do have a go, do that investigation. I might actually end up setting up a how-to video on how to have it installed on your laptop. So I'll do that at some point in the future. So watch this space. So that's all I have for you today. If you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget the like button, to share the video to colleagues, friends. And if you haven't done so, to please subscribe to this channel, as I regularly publish some interesting videos such as these, anything to do with Bitcoin, blockchain technology, and the future of finance. So till next time.